It's Nebraska, people giving you Nebraska weather news.
And welcome back. President Obama's new Ebola response coordinator, KOLN, begins work today. KOLN met with the president and senior members of the government's Ebola response team this afternoon.
The move comes as the CDC announces 21-day monitoring of anybody returning to the U.S. from Ebola-stricken African nations. So joining us now is Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, and always glad to have you here, Congressman.
Good to see you again. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we'd like to turn to a very serious topic, and that is the Ebola crisis. How serious is it, and is it taking our focus away from ISIS?
Well, it's very serious, and in the last few months, it seems like as a country we've gone from crisis to crisis, drama to drama, and yes, it does take our eyes off of the crisis in the Middle East and the barbaric activity that they're engaged in, but Ebola is very serious. I mean, 4,500 people have died officially. The numbers might be closer to 12,000. We should be very concerned about the potential spread of this into the United States. I think there was an overestimation of the capacity of the medical system in the United States to be prepared for this, and an underestimation of how easily this could spread. So this is one of the reasons that I've personally called for more stringent travel restrictions. I think non-essential commercial flights ought to end. There has been some tightening of this and screening at the airports, and that's good movement. Now everyone will go through, coming from those areas, will go through 5 major airports. But still, it seems to me that non-essential movement would be an important part of trying to quarantine this area.
Do you think that the Ebola crisis has been overblown, or do you think it is very serious?
No,
I mean, should we have our focus on it?
I think it's quite serious, and clearly the disease can be spread very easily. Now, I was on the phone with Dr. Raj Shah, who's head of the Agency for International Development, and he's probably a part of that press conference that you just mentioned there. He just returned from Liberia. They're the primary agency of the United States on the ground there fighting the disease and epidemic. Liberia is a very close ally of ours. The president holds American citizenship. That was a staging area for our troops in World War II before their invasion of North Africa, long connectedness between the two countries. And it's the epicenter of this horrific contagion. So our efforts there are trying to do the best we can to treat people who have it and prevent its further spread. There's some good news and bad news. The mortality rate continues to be very high. As Dr. Shaw told me, they're just watching kids die. There's very little they can do other than basic medical intervention. And as you heard the doctor speak from Omaha, the quicker somebody gets help, the more likelihood they can survive it. The bit of good news is that the growth rate of the disease is slowing. So the exponential growth rate is slowing, and that's through basic medical interventions such as burying the dead quickly, not touching the dead, which apparently is a custom in the area. 65% of cases are transmitted through that means. There's chlorine wash being implemented through the country, so this is slowing its spread. So hopefully, as it slows, it's contained, and this crisis level begins to diminish, but it's still very serious.
So Americans should be a little concerned then.
Yes, we have to be very vigilant about this. I think, again, there was an underestimation at first from the government as to how much of a threat this could be to us, but fortunately, we see patients now being cleared from hospitals, and those who have had contact or even a remote possibility of contact not contracting the disease, so that's helpful.
Well, and the other issue, of course, is when you have a big issue like this going on, taking the headlines, it kind of takes our attention away from, as you mentioned, ISIL. What's going on with that right now?
Well, months ago, the best CIA analysts couldn't have imagined that this group of religious zealots would have conquered vast swaths of both Iraq and Syria, and yet they have. This is 8th century barbarism with 21st century weaponry, and their march continues. Now, the U.S. airstrikes, the United States has led the airstrikes. I support that. I think this was important for us because we have the capacity to try to contain them as quickly as possible while building an international coalition. The key to stopping this is that the Sunni Arab nations, particularly the Sunni Muslim nations, must fight for themselves. We have to have a regeneration of the commitment of the Baghdad central government to fight for themselves, empowering the Kurdish region, who I've been assured are willing to fight, and they've absorbed huge amounts of refugees, by the way, from the Christian areas of Iraq, from the Yazidi areas of Iraq. They're committed to tolerance, as they tell me, but they are also committed to fight, but they've told we can't fight your weapons. In other words, ISIL has captured many American weapons from the Iraqi army, and that's the serious nature of this at the moment. The other bit of good news is that Turkey has decided to enter this fight. For them to have sat on the sidelines watching this happen on their own border was just unconscionable. An ally of ours, a member of NATO, and yet their hesitancy to engage in this is very problematic. But they are starting to engage in this fight, and that's important as well to try to contain this. But to your point, yes, we have all of this going on, and Ebola has been an essential, important, understandable diversion. But nonetheless, this crisis continues in the Middle East.
Okay.
Congressman Fortenberry, always nice to have you here. We're out of time.
Great.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Well, we've had a pretty dry streak the last couple of days, but that is about to change.
Let's take a